You've got to stay and be in your learning zone because you know why? Because the quest for perfection, I think it's a losing game. Now you're gonna say, why would I say such a thing? Because often in our day-to-day life, we want to be as good as we can be, if not the best. The question here is, if you want to reach perfection, is that you have put an end goal, and your perfection is based on what you know. And guess what? Every time we know something more, our ideas of what the future can be, whatever we can do, is getting bigger and bigger. So if you're focusing on life on reaching perfection based on what you know, what will happen here is that you'll stay stagnant. Or when you reach your idea of perfection, you're going to stay put and think of how many opportunities you might be missing. So, welcome to this podcast. My name is Alain Faber, and I've been teaching a science teacher and a teacher for more than 25 years. And I bring for this podcast different ideas that I have about learning, about teaching, but also insight from experiences I go through during the day, as well as conversations that I have with colleagues of mine and good friends when we're discussing about the current time and what makes us best. So, if you're new to our podcast, my podcast is always divided in 2 or 3 parts. First two is always the student's perspective. The second, teacher's perspective, and the leader's perspective. Tonight, I won't talk about the leader's perspective because I don't know enough to have my grain of salt. But we're going to certainly talk about the student's perspective and the teacher's perspective. Now, as a teacher, I always share to the students that I want them to reach the best version of themselves. But you have to keep in mind that if I am teaching in grade 9, I want them to reach their best self at the level of grade 9. I always try to see if I can move them a little bit higher with their vision. But what happens is that if you remember, some of you were in first and second grade, and then you went to third and fourth grade, and eventually grade 7, grade 8, every time you moved one grade up, what happened is that you discovered new things, you learned um, new skills. What happened is that the version of yourself keeps expanding. So in grade 9, I am expanding their mind to become the best self of grade 9, giving them the skills so they can continue as they go along. And that's the advantage of learning at school, because every year there's a growth pattern that we can reproduce, and then there's an evolution and expansion on what people can do. The difficulties, though, is that if you are thinking that you want to be the best version of yourself based on a current idea of what the best is, based on your current understanding of what perfection is, what happens here is that at some point you get to a point where it is a limiting belief, because you get to a point where if you don't learn anything new, then you're missing out on the next quest. Because keep in mind that I think that the best, so if you think of this podcast, which is, let's see, just because it is, I forgot, that's not very good. So learn to teach for success. There you go. That's the name of the podcast. And the idea here is that we always want to learn so that you can move forward. So let's see. I feel like I'm repeating myself. So let's see if I can go to my first segment, which is about the learner's perspective. Now, if you think of a learner's perspective, a learner, regardless of the grades in elementary school, high school, beyond, even if you think of someone that is learning a new trade or a new skill as a manager, what happens here is that you are growing and learning within the class you're taking. You're learning something new. And often, when you're learning something new, your ideas and perception of what you see is expanding, which is quite amazing because you are in your learning zone. So you are taking your best self and allowing itself to expand, to grow even bigger. Now, what's interesting too is that if you take a class, you're taking a class at the level it is. Is it an introductory class? Is it an intermediate class? Or is it an advanced class? So what happened here is that every time you take a class, you learn something new. Every time you learn something new, what happened here is that your ideas are expanding, and therefore your learning zone is expanding. Now, if you were to think about, I don't know, if you go back 3 years ago or 5 years ago, and you're thinking what was the perfect day or what was your perfect self back then, it's surely different than what you think your perfect self is right now. And that is because in the last 5 years, you've learned new things, you've met new people, you have new perspective, and therefore your idea of perfection has evolved. And it is important to have this idea of perfection evolve, because what makes you the best version of yourself is not static. It wants to expand. And I remember when was it? It was a book from Benjamin Hardy. So Dr. Benjamin Hardy, and his book is 10x is easier than 2x. And his idea here is sometimes when you are at work, you're at school, you're in your team, and you say, okay, this is what I'm doing. Let's see if I can do more. So what you do, you take your skills, you take what you know, the people you know, and then you work harder to get to where you want to be. However, this is, you can go maybe 2x, you can be doing twice as much work, twice as much return. However, if you want to 10x yourself, 10x your productivity, 10x your best self, what happens is that you need to learn something new. You need to learn something new because you need to get away from what defines you, where you are at that moment, so that you can expand yourself to go even beyond. So that's something to keep in mind. And by saying that, going beyond, I need to make sure that I have here the sound for you. It's all, and then that's beautiful. Thank you very much for the little pause here. So Dr. Benjamin Hardy, that's was his idea. 10x is easier than 2x because 2x, you just work harder. That is great without learning. If you want to go beyond, learning is what makes a difference. And learning comes from different parts. So if you're in a class, it's easy. You are part of a group that is willing to learn. So the networking is amazing. If you have a good trainer or a good teacher, a good manager, then they can help you learn what you need so you can expand your perspective at that moment. Because keep in mind that the purpose of learning is to expand your skill base, to expand your knowledge base, so that you can realize your limiting beliefs, so that you can grow from there. So in school, from grade 1 to 12, it's fairly easy because every time you learn something new, every time you move grades, the environment is such that you're learning something new. Now, sometimes people say, well, in high school, I kept growing. And some people finished high school, some people finished college or university, some people went into the trades. And after they finished their learning journey, then they stopped learning, they stopped reading, they stopped meeting new people. And that's something to be mindful of. Because I remember there's one person I enjoy listening to his perspective, and his name is Alex Hormozy. And in one of his interviews, he was saying something that was interesting that I will apply to learning. And he was saying that in his journey, he got to a point where he was thinking that what he doesn't know is costing him millions of dollars a year, because he knew that people could make money, and therefore not knowing how to do so, it was detrimental for him. But it's the same thing with learning in the school. As a learner, what you don't know is costing you. And what is it costing you? It's costing you, could cost you money for job perspective, for example, or if you have great ideas for your business. It could also be costing you time, because you don't have the skills or the knowledge to be able to go faster and get to the new level of what you want to do. And the other one is it can cost you energy. Sometimes, and you know as well as me, as a learner, sometimes we feel that we have so many things to do that we have no more time and no more energy to do what we like to do. So that's something to think about. So if we get to this point, that means that there's something we're missing to be able to, that is costing us energy. So that is the point here for the learners. With respect to the teacher's perspective, so that's an interesting one. So as a teacher, I went to Teachers College, and guess what? I graduated in 1999. That's a long time ago. Or 1998. That's a good question. I'll have to double check. What happened here is that it was in the past millennia, the last century. So since that time, a lot of things have changed. So in the last 25 years, I did learn a lot about pedagogy, about new ways of learning for me as a teacher, but also new ways to help students learn better, to help my colleague to be better people at teaching, but also building the environment for so that learners are feeling comfortable to do so. Indeed, the workplace is a great place in the school to become a better teacher because you are surrounded by teachers. So here, pedagogy is something that I have worked with, I've learned, but I've expanded my mind. But what's interesting though is that as pedagogy is evolving, as new ideas are coming through, sometimes it becomes like a cycle. I see ideas coming through that are very similar to what I did 25 years ago, but there's new vocabulary, new perspective on how things are going. And it's interesting to see how that is. The second part is about skills. Teachers always have different skills, and the best way to become a better teacher is to actually teach. Now, I do realize that one thing that we need to do more and more is to have positive uh, meeting or environments for teachers to share positive experiences and positive um, pedagogies and ideas and skills that they apply in their classrooms. That would work well for new teachers, for example, for people that sometimes may be struggling in not knowing what's the next step, or for people saying, you know what, I've done the same thing for the last few years. Let's see if I can learn something new. And as we are expecting our students to grow and expand their limiting beliefs, teachers also need to do so. And the other one is about teaching the teachers know-how. This idea here, so there's a lot of things we know. To be able to have the know-how, you need to have had the experience of testing new few things. But on top of that, it's not only being successful at what you do, but having failed several times so that you can learn from your failures so you can grow from there. Because if you remember at the beginning, I said that you've got to be in your learning zone. Otherwise, your quest for perfection is a losing game. So there are no perfect teachers. For me, even every time we go on for a new semester, a new year, I have in my mind what makes a good teacher. But every year I learn something new. Every year I have amazing students that make me realize that I know a lot of things, but there's so much more I need to learn from them, from the world, from society, so that we can learn together. And I think that is something that sometimes we think we know, but sometimes I have to be mindful to keep in mind. Otherwise, it is me teaching my students instead of me and my students being in the learning environment. So that's something to be looking into. Perfect. And this whole idea here is that if you have evolving teachers where the limiting beliefs are expanding, where they're redefining what is their best self all the time, then these are excellent role models for students to do so. Not just for the high school time, but keeping in mind that it's a lifelong journey to do so. And with respect to the leader's perspective today, I don't have any perspective on that. So if it happens you're a leader, if it happens you're a learner or a teacher today, I would love to know what you learned today. What you learned today in your class, what you learned as a teacher, what you learned as a leader, to make sure that you grow as a person, but also expand your idea of what learning is, but also what is your best version of self. On this will be the podcast we have today. If you have any questions, comments, clarification questions, put them in the comments below. I'm always looking at them because it's always nice to see your perspective on these topics. On this, I want you to be great. I want you to be in your learning zone this week, and I want you to learn something new so you can expand your vision of what the best version of you is. On this, have a nice day, and I'll see you next week at 7:30. Take care. Bye-bye.